joined now by Stéphane Hallegate, a climate change senior advisor at the World Bak. Thanks very much for being here today. First of all, I'd like to ask you, adaptation and mitigation will require billions in investments. Developing nations, can they afford it?
So we have been working on precise plans for developing countries to not only reduce emissions and adapt to climate change, but also reduce poverty and bring the population what they need in terms of energy, water, and so on. Those plans are expensive. They require a lot of investments. At the global level, it's manageable. But if we look at low-income countries, they might have to spend 5-8% of their GDP on those investments. They won't be able to do it if they don't have support from higher income countries in the form of concessional finance, in the form of grants, to help them pass this very difficult transition.
That brings us obviously to this thorny question of climate finance. I mean, we know that countries have pledged a total of $100 billion by 2020. They have fallen short of that objective. They have only provided $80 billion. What's taking so long?
So very clearly, for these type of negotiations to work, commitments have to be met, right? So this is the first thing to say, that higher income countries need to just increase those flows to meet the commitment that they made years ago. And we can see now that, especially for the countries that are in most trouble, like thinking about sub-Saharan Africa or small islands, for instance, the needs to adapt to climate change and reduce emissions at the same time are really too high for them to do it just with market finance. They will need some sort of concessionality, and developed countries needs to be there to provide that.
Because it's really important to make this distinction that the majority of climate finance is being provided in the form of loans as opposed to grants. And I think this is a really important distinction that we should be making. And a lot of people are saying that this is something inherently unfair for developing nations that have poor credit ratings.
So when we look at the investment needs, there are very different types of needs. For some of them, loans are perfectly acceptable, and the private sector can even provide the financing. If you're thinking about solar panels and solar power today, it can be something provided by the private sector. But there are other things, like the poorest communities, to help them adapt, or to provide electricity to remote places. We know that the private sector and normal finance loans won't make it happen. So for those categories, the role of concessional finance and grants is really important. So it's not that either or loans or grants. We know we need both. And what's missing now is grant-type resources.
Development banks like the World Bank obviously play a huge role in providing climate finance. What else can the World Bank do in order to bring more money to the table and more grants to the table?
So we're providing resources that really combine the development objectives with the climate objectives. But of course, we can do it with the resources we have. And especially in the countries where to really trigger those investments, you need some grants or some better conditions to make it more affordable for poor countries. Without that support, it's very difficult to grow. So there is a need for countries to step up and to help us deliver more.
Stéphane Hallegate, a climate change advisor at the World Bank, thank you very much for your analysis. And we'll be following live all the latest speeches from the plenary hall in the coming hours. Emmanuel Macron, French President Emmanuel Macron, is expected to take to the podium in just a few hours. Macron, who addressed this question of climate finance and the injustice, the climate injustice that we are seeing at the moment, calling on the U.S. and China also to increase their share of investments.
Valerie, thank you so much for that. Valerie DeKimpe there reporting from Sharm el-Sheikh, and we will be covering French President Emmanuel Macron's speech live here on France 24. Be sure to stay tuned for that.